Take a seat. There are some little papers on the seats with pens for you to fill out. The Jamaica Historical Foundation and the Vermont Humanities Council are sponsoring this event. Just a reminder to please turn off the ringer on your cell phones. We're being taped. BCTV is here, which is very nice. I want to talk for just a second about the Jamaica Historical Foundation. We have a very active group that takes on many projects and accomplishes quite a bit. 12 years ago or so, we had a couple of boxes stored in the upstairs of the firehouse, and we now have the historic brick bank building down here, a couple buildings down, and we've filled it with memorabilia and artifacts that we found or bought on eBay, and through many donations. We just had a batch of stuff from the Bills family tonight. We have a project with our website, and in a moment I'll have Lou talk about the website. He's our website guru. We have done a lot of work, a lot of scanning, and one of our newest projects is QR coding. I don't know how many of you are familiar with QR codes, but we are going to be having little booklets, and you will be able to go to each cemetery, a booklet for each cemetery, or for the village, or for Civil War veterans, or any other veterans in town. And you can take that booklet, and inside will be QR codes. So if you go to the cemetery, it'll all be numbered with a little map, and you can walk to the first stone and use your phone with the QR code and the information about that person, or the house along Main Street, or the Civil War veteran will come up on your phone. So that's our newest project. But one of our best projects is the website. Lou will talk about that for a moment, and then we will have Howard Coffin come up and speak, and we have Steve Rawson. His great-grandfather's gun and Civil War memorabilia is in the back. And we also have Mike Petronic here. Where did he go? Ah, you were just in uniform. Oh, you still are. Okay.
I thought everybody was going to be.
He's been in quite a few reenactments over the years. So here's Lou. Thank you.
Yeah, just a word about the website. It's at it's called JamaicaHF.info. That's the name of the website. And if you forget it, all you need to do is drive by the bank building and look on the sign in front, and you'll see it there. And what we try to do with that website, we have a few interesting articles, but what it's mostly designed for is for people to do genealogical research in town. And we've been collecting information from databases and from vital records from towns. And what we've tried to do is to take all the information we know about one person and put it all together. So in some cases, we might have their birth record, their death record, their marriage record. We've also got census info, which has been incorporated in. And we're now putting in school records so we can show what year they may have attended what school in town. So we're trying to gather as much information as we can that we have in our records about each information, about each person. So that's really what the website is designed to do. So if you have any family members, we encourage you to just go there and see if the information is correct, because sometimes when we combine things together, we don't even know if it's correct, where we have a lot of clues that tell us it is, but it's not. So we hope that all of you who have family members who may have grown up in Jamaica in the past, check the website out and
Would you read the website here?
It's Jamaica HF for Historic Foundation.info.
And it's also on the brochures here in the
Ah,
back for
good.
the Historical Foundation.
Okay, thank you. Well, I will introduce him, Howard Coffin, guest speaker. Thank you, Howard.
Can you hear me? Yes. All right. How about normal voice? Can you hear me back there?
Yes.
I've got work to do. I'm going to get rid of this. You don't mind? Yes. There. Well, nice to be back. Trying to figure out today how long it's been. I spoke here 5, 6 years ago, and I'm told it was in this hall. My number of talks in Vermont in the Civil War now is up to over 500, and it gets confusing sometimes. But anyway, it's nice to be back. Here I am, and I've been trying to get to work. I'm contracted to a publisher to do a memoir, which I haven't. I've had writer's block since my wife died, and it's been a hard thing to do. And I was going over some notes I made yesterday, and I came on. I thought I'd share this story with you. I came on a note I'd written down about traveling in the northern part of the state to give a talk, and I stopped on the way at this, I'm not going to tell you what town it was, at this big library in northern Vermont, and I walked in the door and went up to the desk, and I asked the woman at the desk if she would show me where the Vermont books were, and she looked at me and she said, "Oh my God, you're a writer." And I said, "Well, yeah." And she said, "Oh my God, can I get the staff together to meet you?" And I said, "Yeah, okay, sure." And so anyway, she said, stay right here. And so she went off to the building, and she got, I think, 5 people, and got them assembled there behind the desk. And I stood there, and she said, "This is so exciting for us to have a writer here." She said, "I want you all to meet Joe Citro." Now, Joe's a friend of mine. You know, he writes those weird books about ghosts and everything, you know. And so anyway, I said, "Hello, Howard Coffin." "Oh, yes," she said. "Well, anyway." I've forgotten about that. That was probably 10 years ago. So it'll be in the book anyway. Well, but the subject tonight is a new subject for me, the Vermont sharpshooter. And I'm just newly onto this. So if you'll excuse me tonight, I'll be looking at my notes. I usually speak without notes, but I'm going to be glancing at these tonight because it is new, and I think I've given this talk three times, not down this way. So here we go, and I hope it makes sense. Hiram Burdan was, in most ways, a remarkable man. Hiram Burdan was an inventor, and before the Civil War he had gotten federal patents on many things, including a machine for separating gold from ore, which is still used, a folding lifeboat, and some kind of a bakery machine that's still used. He made a lot of money by the time the Civil War began, and when it started, he wanted to help. Naturally, an inventor, he had an idea. And he contacted the War Department as the war began, and I think he went to see Abraham Lincoln. He also went to see the Secretary of War, Simon Cameron. Burdan wanted to organize the best rifle shots in each state into a regiment of sharpshooters. 750 men, 10 companies of 75 men from 10 states. His idea was that the sharpshooters in a battle would stay back from the front lines a quarter to 3/8 of a mile, and from back there they would pick off the officers, the Confederate officers. It was an interesting idea, but the war had barely begun before Burdan and everybody else realized it didn't work. It didn't work because battles are smoky things, and from 3/8 of a mile you can't see anybody in a battle of any size. And so what happened was that as the war evolved, they became frontline fighters, or even skirmishers out in front of the front line. On January 15, 1861, Secretary of War Simon Cameron approved the formation of one sharpshooter regiment of 1,000 men, 10 companies of 100 men each. By the way, Simon Cameron didn't last very long as Secretary of War. He ran afoul of Abraham Lincoln, which is a tough thing to do. Abraham Lincoln said of Simon Cameron after he fired him, the only thing he wouldn't steal was a hot stove. Of course, you can't pick it up, right? So he got rid of it, and Lincoln was like that. He was tough. So how do you choose? How do you choose the men for a sharpshooter outfit? This is the way that Vermont's official Civil War historian, G.G. Benedict, who won a Medal of Honor at Gettysburg, incidentally, described the tryouts. The conditions for enlistment required that each recruit should, in public trial, fire into the shoulder and without telescopic sights, in 10 shots, place 10 bullets within a 10-inch ring at a distance of 200 yards. And this test was rigidly exacted. Now, and also, you had to bring your own gun. Now, Berdan ordered uniforms. He wanted to make the sharpshooters special, so he ordered uniforms of dark blue with a black fringe around the bottom, a soft crown hat with a small black feather, also a blue overcoat. Then he soon changed the uniforms to green for camouflage. That made sense. And then he added a gray overcoat for winter. But those didn't last long because somebody pointed out to him that the Confederates were wearing it. That idea was trash. So they wore a green uniforms, and they were very, very proud, very proud of those uniforms. Now, to raise men for his regiments, Berdan turned to his business connections all throughout the northern states. And he came in Vermont to a Rutlander named William Y.Y. Ripley, who was the brother of a famous Civil War general, Edward Hastings Ripley, who commanded the 9th Vermont Regiment and led the first Union troops into Richmond when it was captured. And Ripley was a great shot. Ripley announced that enlistments, if you wanted to serve in the sharpshooters, you had to sign on for 3 years. The first trials were held at West Randolph, which is today the village of Randolph, which sort of seems to have become the sharpshooting capital of Vermont. And Berdan attended the first trials held at Randolph. Why was he around? Well, he had a wife who came from West Lebanon, New Hampshire, right along the river where all the stores now are. I haven't yet gone looking for the house, but she was a West Lebanon lady. The first trials resulted in the formation of Company F, the Vermont Company of the 1st United States Sharpshooter Regiment. It was commanded by Edmund Weston, a Randolph man. The company met the 13th of September, 1861 on the Randolph Fairgrounds. If you know Randolph at all, it's right where the Randolph Hospital, the Gifford Hospital, is today. That, incidentally, was where I had my tonsils out in 1948. Yeah. It was a bloody mess. 12 of us, one right after the other. We had to get those tonsils out. So this first company, 113 men at Randolph qualified, but they only took 100 men south with them. I don't know what they did to the other 13. But they went by train to Weehawken, New Jersey, just across the river from New York City, where the whole 1,000-man regiment was in training. So they shot and drilled for a couple of days, and then on the weekend, Verdun gave a demonstration. Now, people were coming by hundreds from New York City to see, this was a tourist attraction, to watch the training, you know. And Verdun might have been the best shot in America. And he gave this demonstration one day. He set up a man-sized cutout target at a distance of 200 yards. And he named it Jefferson Davis. Now, if Rawsons were watching this day, it was a Saturday, and the wind was blowing. Any of you that are shooters know that when the wind blows, it makes everything more difficult. I'm an Army veteran, and they were always teaching us Tennessee elevation and Kentucky windage, you know, to compensate for distance and wind. So the wind's blowing, he's at 200 yards. His first shot fired standing hit the chief, Jefferson Davis. Second, hit the cap. Verdun, before the third shot, said, "I'll put an eye out." And damned if he didn't hit it right now. Then he asked the spectators to name the target. Ear, top of the head, nose. Every time, 200 yards, he did it. Now the wind is increasing. Now he sets up a circular target at 600 yards. Again, unsupported, he puts 10 straight shots into a 22-inch ring. 600 yards. I mean, people were amazed. And then he sets up Jefferson Davis at 600 yards. The wind is blowing. The wind is blowing. Somebody hollers at Verdun, "Where will you hit?" Verdun says, "One shot, right off." He takes a lot of time. Deep breath, and fires right eye at 600 yards in the wind. Later, he said it was luck. Anyway, he did. Amazing performance. I mean, these guys could shoot. On the September 24th, the whole 1st Regiment moves down to Washington, D.C., and made camp on the north side of the city of Washington on a hillside, and it was called Camp of Instruction, the full 1,000 men of the 1st Sharpshooter Regiment. It soon became very obvious that Verdun didn't know much about the military. He had no military experience. The men began to complain about him. He sited the camp on this hillside. At the top of the hill, he put the latrines and the tents down below. And people started getting sick. Anyway, complaints. One day, while they are having firing practice, who shows up but General George Brinton McClellan, commander of the Army of the Potomac, and Abraham Lincoln. And Lincoln borrows a rifle from a Vermonter, Cassius Pack, from up in Brookfield, and we don't know exactly how well Lincoln did, but Pack said he could shoot. And no wonder he could, because he was a frontier boy, you know. I mean, Lincoln, you know, was a country boy, and surely he had been a squirrel hunter, you know. Not all Vermonters were. So, some of the officers quit, disgusted with Verdun's lack of military bearing, foolish orders he gave. All the men had brought their own rifles, and Verdun doesn't really know what to do about rifles, so he orders Springfields, and a few of them come, but they don't work very well. Then he orders Sharps rifles. and they're the ones that the sharpshooters would use through the war. Incidentally, we have a telescopic rifle Civil War era with us here tonight. We're going to hear about that later on. It's a treasure. Now, two more companies, 100-man companies of Vermonters, Vermont sharpshooters are formed. Company E and Company H of the 2nd U.S. Sharpshooter Regiment. And so you've got two out of these two companies out of a total here of 10 companies that are Vermonters. I mean, an outsized number. Company E mustered in at Randolph, commanded by a man named Homer Stoughton, who's going to become a major figure in sharpshooting in the Civil War. And the new company arrives in Washington on the 24th of November. Company H gathers at Brattleboro and goes to Washington right around New Year's Day, 1862. The second regiment with the two Vermont companies at first will serve under the command of General Irvin McDowell. The first sharpshooters, the ones that went down first, are made part of the Army of the Potomac under General George Brinton McClellan, and in the spring of 1861, they join the 100,000-man army that goes by ship from the Washington area down to the Virginia Peninsula to move against Richmond. They move along the Virginia Peninsula, and all of a sudden, the whole army comes to a river that nobody knew was there. The Warwick River. It wasn't on any of their maps. And it's a wide river. It's fully as wide as the Connecticut, maybe up around Bellows Falls. It's a sizable river. And they begin to fight back and forth, shoot back and forth across the river. And the sharpshooters are so good that they clear Confederate artillery from a 2-mile stretch along the far bank of the river. One day, William Y.W. Ripley, the head of things in that first regiment, comes out to watch the skirmish going on back and forth across this river, and he sees one of his men in a duel with a Confederate sharpshooter on the far side. And the poor Vermonter gets shot through the head. Well, Ripley grabs his rifle, gets behind the corner of a building. He can spot the Confederate 300 yards away across the river. He waits and he waits, peering around the corner of that building, and he sees that Confederate rise up to shoot. And he jumps around the corner of the building, bang, and back. He kills the Confederate, and just as he comes back behind that building, the bullet hits right on the corner. He just missed being killed. See, they're both, on both sides, they're amazing shots. The fighting goes on. The Peninsula Campaign, the heavy fighting begins when Robert E. Lee takes command of the Confederates around Richmond, and he attacks McClellan, and McClellan gets scared. And in 7 consecutive days of fighting, the Union Army is driven all the way down to the banks of the James River. The sharpshooters fight at Gaines's Mill and at Malvern Hill. William Ripley is badly wounded at Malvern Hill. He's taken out of the war, but his men were wonderful at Malvern Hill, once again wiping out a battery of Confederate artillery. Now, while this is all going on around Richmond, the 2nd U.S. Sharpshooters with the two Vermont companies, E and H, has moved from Washington out down toward the Fredericksburg area. Then they move toward the Shenandoah Valley, and they lose 40 men in a train wreck on the way to the Shenandoah. Not only one killed, but most of them were out of action for a sizable amount of time. Now, in the summer of 1862, the 2nd Sharpshooters fight at the Battle of 2nd Manassas, and they fight very well, slowing down the victorious assault of General James Longstreet on the third day of the battle, an amazing battle where Lee, Jackson, and Longstreet team up to defeat a Union Army under General Pope. Then comes, after that battle, Lee is full of courage, and he moves on north in his first invasion of the northern states. And that invasion, of course, will end at the Battle of Antietam in the middle of September, the bloodiest single day of the Civil War. 24,000 Americans, north and south, become casualties on that one single day. It's really a stalemate, a battle terribly badly fought by McClellan. He greatly outnumbered Lee, but he didn't know what to do with his troops. And but the sharpshooters are magnificent, fighting in the area, the eastern part of the battlefield. Have any of you been to Antietam? Yeah, you see, it's so beautiful, and that's the first area of the fighting was the cornfield, which every tour goes to. 7,000 men were killed or wounded in the first 2 hours of the fighting in that cornfield. And the sharpshooters fought along the rail fence to slow the advance of Stonewall Jackson's men. They were wonderful at Antietam. And then some of the sharpshooters pursue the retreating Confederates down to the Potomac, and Corporal Cassius Pack, the man who had loaned Lincoln his rifle from Brookfield, wins the Medal of Honor for capturing a battery of Confederate artillery going across, wading the river. A remarkable performance. More recruits coming October. We're going to be starting to lose men to wounds. Heavy casualties at Antietam. Now on November 18th, 1862, Homer Stoughton from Randolph is named commander of the 2nd U.S. Sharpshooter Regiment, all 1,000 men. All 1,000 men. Incidentally, there's a very famous Stoughton in the Civil War from Chester. Edwin Stoughton, who commanded the 2nd Vermont Brigade until he was captured, naked, from his bed by John Singleton Mosley, great Confederate raider. That ended his career. We'll talk a little more about that. The two Stoughtons are not, as far as I know, related. December 1862, all the sharpshooters fight at 2nd Fredericksburg. The 2nd Regiment in front of that famous sunken road that the Union soldiers attacked all day long, never able to get within 100 yards of it. They lose about 6,000 casualties in front of that wall. Shelby Foote, the Confederate historian, said it may have been the greatest act of bravery in the Civil War as they kept trying to reach that wall. It ended up as being kind of a bloody, foolish enterprise. But the sharpshooters accounted for themselves well, and only were able to get off the battlefield in front of that wall by piling the dead up in front of them and crawling away in the night. It was a horrible battlefield. The sharpshooters all fight at Chancellorsville in May of 1863 and capture about 400 Confederate prisoners with a sudden advance south of the Chancellor House. But that's one of the few successes that the Union has at Chancellorsville. Chancellorsville is one of the great Confederate victories of the Civil War. It happens right near Fredericksburg, Virginia, and it is a magnificent collaboration between Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson. Lee, outnumbered 2-1, sends Jackson on a daring 12-mile march across the front of the Union Army to launch a flank attack on the 2nd day of May that rolls up the Union Army. A magnificent, maybe the great maneuver of the Civil War, and except for one that the Vermonters made. And Jackson, unfortunately for the Confederacy, is mortally wounded on the 2nd of May going out in the night to scout the Union lines. Foolish move. Generals have no business being out in the darkness along the front lines. Well, Chancellorsville is a stunning Confederate victory. And once again, Robert E. Lee decides to invade the North. He has become confident that his men, though outnumbered and outgunned, cannot be beaten. The Confederates are too good. Lee's confidence is a little too high, perhaps. And he takes his Army of Northern Virginia to the west over the Blue Ridge Mountain into the Shenandoah Valley, and there he turns north, heading Maryland, and north of Maryland he approaches the Pennsylvania line. The Army of the Potomac now is under the command of Joseph Hooker. Soon he'll lose his job to George Gordon Meade, and the army of about 90,000 men has orders to march north and keep between Lee's army and the capital at Washington. And they move north and they cross the line into Pennsylvania on the first day of July, and 10 miles north of the Pennsylvania line is a town where 9 roads come together. And if you're going to have armies moving around southern Pennsylvania, it's almost impossible if they don't run into each other in that town, which is called Gettysburg. Gettysburg, a quiet college town, a farming community, and the armies collide. But it all starts on the first day of July with the Union Armies coming up the Emmitsburg Road, most of them coming from the south up the Emmitsburg Road right towards Gettysburg. And the fighting starts out in this area where there's just 2,500 Union cavalry under General John Buford. Coming from the northwest are some 12,000 soldiers under Ambrose Powell Hill, and Lee is not far behind them. And pretty quick, Buford realizes that he is overwhelmed. And he calls for help, and the First Corps of the Union Army comes to support him and extend the line, and then the 11th Corps of the Union Army extends the line. You know, by the way, I got to put in a footnote. There's an Illinois cavalry company with Buford here. And the morning that the battle begins, about 6 o'clock in the morning, a company of those cavalry, of Illinois cavalry, rides out in that direction and sees in the distance Confederates. And the captain of this group, Marcellus Jones, waits a little while till they come in range, or distant range, borrows a rifle from one of his men, rests it on a fence post, and fires and misses. It was the first shot of the Battle of Gettysburg, and 20 years after the battle, Jones came back to Gettysburg and put a monument about that big on the spot where he fired the first shot, still there. He was from Rupert, Vermont. He was born in Rupert and grew up there. Anyway, footnote to history. I always go there when I take tours down to Gettysburg. Absolutely. So the first day at Gettysburg, Lee didn't want to fight at Gettysburg. But when he got on the battlefield and saw that his men were winning and driving back these Union soldiers, he said, you know, he gave the command to attack along the entire front. And by the end of the day, Lee had won a very convincing Confederate victory. Incidentally, all 3 days at Gettysburg, if you consider each day an individual battle, each day is one of the 10 bloodiest battles of the Civil War, as was the first day. First day casualties about 18,000. And at the end of the day, the Union is driven back to the high ground east of the village. And their line stretches from Colts Hill to Cemetery Hill, and then 3 miles south to 2 prominent hills, Little Round Top and Big Round Top. You probably can't see there, but I'll hold it up. In the middle of this is Cemetery Ridge right here. In the middle is a clump of trees. Over here, Seminary Ridge, in possession of the Confederates. So, yes, the Union is driven back into a line which, as you can see, has the shape of a fishhook. It's the most famous fishhook in the history of the world. And so at the end of that day, a bad day for the Union, but they had the high ground. They had a very good position. The sharpshooters come onto the field. All 3 companies now. All three companies, all 3 Vermont regiments now together in the 3rd Corps of the Army of the Potomac. And they go into camp in this area. Incidentally, the 3rd Corps of the Army of the Potomac is commanded by a general named Daniel Sickles, who's an interesting man. Lincoln always had a hard time making sure that he kept the North together. And so he gave, Sickles had no general's experience, but Lincoln made him a general because he was a Democrat. Lincoln needed Democrats. He had the Republican Party on his side. He needed Democrats. Sickles was a bad cat. Not long before the Civil War, he had murdered his wife's lover just outside the White House, Lafayette Square in Washington. And he was put on trial for murder, and he got himself a good lawyer and was the first American ever to successfully use an insanity defense in a murder trial. And he was acquitted. And he ends up a general. But he didn't know too much about the military. And at the end of the second day's fighting, going into the second day, his 3rd Corps is along this stretch of the Union line, right here, 3rd Corps. And the sharpshooters are attached to this. Well, second day at Gettysburg, beautiful day. 85 degrees, sunshine. Things are pretty quiet through most of the day. But while everyone's resting, James Longstreet is marching south from this area with 18,000 men coming down to attack the southern end of the Union line. He doesn't get his men into position until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. 18,000 men in the trees down in the southern part of the battle. 18,000 men. He's come down into this area in the trees. He's lining, getting his 18,000 men ready. They're going to attack like this, an attack called en echelon, that they'll start at the bottom and then continue trying to break through the Union line. They're going to attack. Here's Big Round Top, here's Little Round Top, and up here is a clump of trees, Devil's Dens in this area. So they're going to attack, and the attack will come at about 4 o'clock. Now, earlier in the day, about 10 o'clock in the morning, Verdun himself takes a group of 100 sharpshooters, and he goes up to the Emmitsburg Road, and he turns south, and then he turns west, and then he turns north in the woods, and he runs into a hornet's nest of Confederates. He hasn't run into Longstreet's men. They haven't gotten here yet. He's run into the southern end of the Confederate line. And there's a hot fight in the woods, and there are casualties, and Dan skedaddles. He does pretty well in that fight. He really was the only fight he was ever in. And he goes back, and he tells Sickles that there's Confederates all over him. Now, Sickles has been getting awfully worried about things. He was worried. Right here, where his 3rd Corps is, 12,000 men, okay, is a low spot in Cemetery Ridge. Up here in the Emmitsburg Road, actually, the Emmitsburg Road, the ridge is high. I mean, it's 40, 50 feet high here and then south of it. But here, the Emmitsburg Road is higher than the ridge. And Sickles says, you know, if the Confederates ever get artillery up there, they're going to blast the daylights out of me. He asked permission to move his 12,000 men up the Gettysburg Road, and Meade said you keep them where they are. And about noon, Sickles says to hell with Meade, and he takes his 12,000 men and he moves them out to the Emmitsburg against orders. So he creates a bulge in the Union line, which we call a salient, like that. 12,000 men. General Winfield Scott Hancock sees this advance and says they'll come tumbling back soon. The sharpshooters are posted in this area to guard the left southern flank of the 3rd Corps, which is very, very vulnerable. Okay. 4 o'clock. Longstreet orders the advance, led by the Texans under John Bell Hood. Hood rides magnificently out in front of his men, and a cannonball takes off his leg. He's out of the war for a year. Damn near killed. Now, Homer Stokely from Renton, commander of that 2nd Sharpshooter Regiment, now has only 200 men in that regiment because of the casualties at Manassas and Chancellorsville. What he does is he takes 169 men and he puts them in a farm lane south of Big Round Top. There's a farmhouse here of a family named Slater. This farm lane is about a quarter of a mile long, and on the south side of it there's a low stone wall with a rail fence on top. It's a perfect sharpshooter position. You can get down in that sunken road and rest your rifle musket on top of the wall, and you've got the rails to protect you. And he puts 169 men in there and waits. At 4 o'clock, the advance of 7,000 Texans come out of the woods, a long line of battle, and they come across the field, and Stoughton orders open fire, and they rip those Texans and send the whole line back. Pretty good. Another advance comes. Another blast. What's that? That's all right. Another advance, and the line holds. Now the Confederates get smart. And they move men to the north, and they come in on the end of that road so they can fire directly down that road. And Stoughton has no choice but to get the hell out of it before all those men are killed. And now the Confederates are attacking all through throwing 18,000 men into the battle, and the sharpshooters retreat. They retreat from tree to tree, from rock to rock, and they retreat up Big Round Top, which is 350 feet above the battlefield. And they are pursued by the 15th Alabama, commanded by a colonel named Olds, and the 47th Alabama, about 1,000 men. And these Alabamians follow them up Round Top. They don't want to leave any Union soldiers in their rear or on their flank. And so the sharpshooters go to the top of Round Top, and then as the Confederates come up under fire, they get the hell out and move on down into this area. The Alabamians, who had marched 20 miles earlier in the day, get to the top of Round Top, and they are exhausted. But finally, they 10, 15 minutes rest. They start down to attack the southern end of the Union line at Little Round Top. Now, Little Round Top was a natural fortification, a hill about 100 feet high with a bare summit where you could put artillery. Big Round Top was all covered with trees, no use to artillery. The problem was that Little Round Top had no Union soldiers on it. And about 15, 20 minutes before all of this begins down here, a Union general named Gouverneur Warren rides down to Round Top to make sure it is defended and finds nobody there. And goes and finds the closest troops he has, a brigade under a man named Strong Vincent, and he brings them up to Round Top, and out on the vulnerable far end, he places the 20th Maine Regiment, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. They will become about the most famous regiment in all of the Civil War. The movie Gettysburg is about Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. The Killer Angels, the book, Deadwood book, about these guys. And here they are holding the southern end of the Union line. If they cave in, the whole Union line is in danger because the Confederates will put cannon here and shell the length of the Union line, or as far as they can reach. Oates' men come down off their Round Top, form a line of battle, and attack Chamberlain, and they're driven back. They attack a second time, and they're driven back. Now they come on a third time, and just before they do, Chamberlain's officers begin to tell him they're running out of ammunition. We're out of ammunition, and Chamberlain astonishes his men by saying, "Fix bayonets." And as the third attack comes on, Chamberlain orders a bayonet attack. And here's one company out here at the end. He swings that around like this. The others go straight downhill. There's only about 300 of them. Well, by the time this happens, 200. And the Confederates are driven back, and Little Round Top is held. The day is saved. The fighting will go on until darkness. The Vermonters will fight up in this area. But thanks be to the 20th Maine, I guess, you know. They saved the day. They're great heroes. I spoke in Maine a few years ago in Chamberlain's hometown. I had a huge crowd, and I said, I want to tell you tonight before I start in that the 20th Maine did not win the Battle of Gettysburg. Boom! I told my wife, start the car. Boy, I had their attention. Wow. Well, anyway, the second day at Gettysburg ends, the Confederates can't break Union line. That night, Lee makes his fatal decision. He's tried the southern end, he can't break through. He's tried to break through up here, no luck. He decides that the center of the Union line must be weak if the ends are so strong. And so he will mass 12,500 men in the woods on Seminary Ridge on a mile front. And at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, after a 2-hour artillery barrage, he will send those men across the mile-wide valley with instructions to break through here at the clump of trees. The lead division in the attack commanded by General George Pickett of Virginia. The assault will be known forever as Pickett's Charge. It's a mighty moment. It's maybe the great moment in the Civil War. It's a beautiful day. The sun is shining. And when Lee brings these men out of the woods, the sun glints off their rifle musket barrels, off the swords, fifes and drums playing, officers shouting commands. It's a magnificent sight. And then they begin to march across that mile-wide field, and the Union artillery opens from Little Round Top up to Cemetery Hill, tearing great bloody holes in their lines, and on they come in perfect step. And the Confederates never marched in perfect step. Why? They were rebels. They didn't like it. They liked to show that they were something different. But today, in perfect step, we don't know why. They must have felt the heavy weight of history. And on they come, and on they come, and they're massing toward the clump of trees. 6,000 of them reach the clump of trees, and suddenly they are hit by an unexpected attack on their southern flank by 900 Vermonters of General George Stannard's 2nd Vermont Brigade, due to go home in 1 week, never fought in a battle, and they destroy the flank of Pickett's charge, and Pickett's charge, the most important attack of the Civil War, is defeated. And as the Confederates come in by the hundreds and prisoners, they say it was the fire from the right, the fire from the right. We couldn't stand. They didn't know where it was coming, who was doing it. But it was the Vermonters, the great heroes of the Battle of Gettysburg. And I spoke at the 150th anniversary of Gettysburg and took a deep breath. And I said, I'm here today to tell you that Vermonters won the Battle of Gettysburg. And not one question. I don't know. Maybe they just thought I was dead. But I think we made a point out. That is the death blow to the most important assault of the Civil War. And then the Confederates send in a second attack, and the 16th Vermont Regiment involved in this fight does an about-face and destroys that attack too. It's amazing. It's just amazing. These guys who never. Well, the war would go on 2 more years. The Confederate Army of Robert E. Lee would never be the same. The high point of the Confederacy is Gettysburg, and then it's downhill from then, but they have a lot of fight in them. Just think of the wilderness, Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor, Cedar Creek. And the sharpshooters would serve almost until the end of the war. They would serve through the Overland Campaign. They would fight at those big battles, Cold Harbor, Spotsylvania, and they would do wonderful. And then, in the last days of the siege of Petersburg, before Appomattox, the sharpshooters are down to such few numbers that their command is dissolved and they're made part of the Vermont Brigade. But they had every reason to be proud. There's a lot more to the story of the sharpshooters, which I'm not going to go into tonight. Anyway, war ends. War ends. Finally, months after the battle, Homer Stoughton gets a chance to sit down and write his official report on what his men did at Gettysburg. Listen to what he said. The enemy advanced a line of battle covering our entire front. One regiment broke 3 times and rallied before it would advance. I held my position until a line of battle was within 100 yards. And finally, when we were flanked from the right, I had to retreat. Now, not nice little description, kind of meager. But listen to this. 20 years after the Civil War, Homer Stoughton went to a reunion of Civil War soldiers. And I don't yet know where it was. I'll find out. And who does he meet there? He meets Colonel Oates. He meets Colonel Oates, who had pursued his men up Round Top and then had attacked Joshua Chamberlain on Little Round Top, you know, and they liked each other. They got along. And after Stoughton gets back to Vermont, gets back to Randolph, he gets a letter from Oates. And I'm just going to read a little bit of it. I didn't know this existed till last summer. The great service which you and your command did was, first, in changing my direction and in drawing my regiment and the 47th Alabama away from the point of attack, Little Round Top. You drew off and delayed this force of over 1,000 men by falling on Vincent men up on Round Top, Little Round Top, by falling on Vincent. And the Union left at the same time in the attack of Law's other 3 regiments, the Texas, the 2 Georgia brigades, and, you know, here we go. But for this service, I am confident we would have swept away the Union line and have captured Little Round Top, which would have won the battle for us and probably the war. Wow. He is saying that if we hadn't been slowed down by you, mostly Vermonters, we would have captured Little Round Top, we would have destroyed the Union line, we would have won at Gettysburg. Did the 20th Maine save the day at Gettysburg? Yes. But for the Vermonters, he's saying they would not have reached Round Top. The Alabamians would have gotten there first, but for the Vermonters. It makes Vermont extremely important in the second day of the battle. I think it challenges the importance of the attack on Pickett's charge. I'm looking into this more, but it's an astonishing admission, and it's true. It's absolutely true. By the end of the Civil War, more Vermonters had served in the Sharpshooters than from any other northern state on a per capita basis. 620 Vermont Sharpshooters. Way more than from any other state on a per capita basis. And it was at Gettysburg that they performed their great service. And it was to Gettysburg, 4 months after the battle, that Lincoln comes to explain why the Civil War needed to be fought. And he does it in the greatest speech in American history, and I'm only going to do the first and final paragraphs to get at the essence of it. He begins, 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. How many years in a score? 20. 7? 87. So he's saying 87 years ago. It's 1863. 87 years ago, do the mathematics, subtract 1776. What's 1776? The Declaration of Independence. Lincoln is saying this country must live by the Declaration of Independence, which says all men are created equal. And we had slaves. And then he concludes by saying, and we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people and for the people, shall not perish from the earth. There is another way of saying that in modern language. Black lives matter. And there's no better place to say that today than in the town that in 1833 produced the first anti-slavery society in Vermont, Jamaica, Vermont. Thanks for listening. them. If you're interested in any of my books, I'll sign them for nothing. But first of all, the gentleman has brought that magnificent scoped rifle back there. I want to hear a couple of things from him about that. Yes?
Where's the Where's that?
In Western Maryland. It's about an hour's drive to get it.
Okay. All right.
It's the most beautiful town.
Okay.
What's the population of Vermont?
315,000. Almost exactly half of what we have today. Yes. 34,000 men.
Thank you. It's a tough act to follow. I have not done this 500 times. This will be my second time doing this. The first was at a reunion in Rawsons, Vermont. My name is Steve Rawson. I'm the president of the Rawson Family Association. We have our reunion at the Rawsonville Schoolhouse just up the street every year. I was lucky years ago. My grandfather conserved a lot of the Rawson family, my great-grandfather's information, a lot of his artifacts, a lot of newspaper articles from the 1800s and 1900s. And we also have a 1875 Rawson family genealogy, which was up till 1895, which is up to the seventh generation. And so there's a lot of information in here that we have, and we've had this reprinted, and we sell it at the reunion. And what it is it talks about the history of the Rawson family from the first Rawson in the United States, and goes up to 1875. There's about 3,700 people in here, and nowadays, we have an archivist which keeps the Rawson Family Association up, and we have 159,000 Rawsons over that period of time up to the current. So a lot of people have asked, why don't we republish it? It'd be kind of hard to keep it up to date. I want to give a little history about the Rawson family and how I got here today, actually, and my interest in the Civil War and the U.S. Sharpshooters. Edward Rawson was the first Rawson in the United States. And he was born in England and moved to the United States in 1636. And he moved into Newbury in Massachusetts at the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And from 1638 to 1647, he was a Newbury town clerk, selectman, commissioner, attorney for the trial of small cases in Newbury. In 1650, he was chosen as a secretary of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And he served in that position for 36 years. He wrote in 1675 the Law and Order of War, which was if you read it, it's in the book here, if you read about it, it's pretty compelling of what we expected of our soldiers. If you disobeyed a command from an officer, sentence was death. If you sold your ammunition outside of, sentence was death. If you did anything against the flag, sentence was death. And there's about 19 different things, and some of them weren't so critical. Some of them were at the behest of the officer. For example, if you came back late from leave, it was up to your officer to determine what you'd have to happen to you. He died in 1693. Rawsons in Vermont are descendants of two of Edward's sons. He had 12 children, only 2 lived long enough to marry and remain in America, William and Grindal. Rawson history of England goes back to the 1500s, associated with the English church and the crown. Jumping ahead to the 6th generation, Bailey Rawson, which if anybody from the area may have familiar with him, he was a pioneer settler of Rawsonville, which is named is established with 1812. He was born in Massachusetts in 1760. He enlisted in the Revolutionary Army with his father at the age of 14. He was a fife major, and he was present at the surrender of British General Burgoyne in Saratoga in October 17, 1777, which was a turning point in the American Revolution that prevented the British from dividing New England from the rest of the colonies. He lived in Townsend, Vermont, was a farmer, and was traveling throughout the towns across the northwest corner of Jamaica. He was impressed with the location. In 1810, built a log home where Rawsonville now stands. He built a dam and sawmill on the Winall River. 13 grandsons of Bailey Rawson Sr. served in the late war, the Civil War. 13 grandsons. Jump ahead a couple more generations. Harrison Rawson, my great-grandfather, 8th generation, grandson of Bailey Rawson. Born in Jamaica, Vermont, July 27, 1842, probably in Rawsonville. Out of 16 children, he was one of 16 children, 7 who passed before the age of 10. He was a Civil War sharpshooter, Vermont 2nd U.S. Sharpshooters, Company H. Harrison had 2 brothers, also from Jamaica, that were in the Civil War, Webster and Sylvester. Both were in the Vermont 9th Infantry and the Vermont 4th Infantry. He also had 10 cousins in the Civil War. The family of Captain Lowell Rawson, which was Harrison Lowell's uncle, was from Worcester, Mass, and was a proud record of 6 sons having served for the Republic of the Civil War. Captain Rawson's wife was originally from Jamaica, Vermont. Her name was Lucy Gale. Gilbert from Company C. 3 of his sons of the 6 mustered in Massachusetts. The other 3 mustered in Vermont. Gilbert from Company C saved the battle standard, the Massachusetts flag, from being captured. Gilbert carried the standard through 12 battles of the Civil War, most of any soldier in the Civil War. Major battles: Wilderness, Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor, Petersburg. The bullet-riddled and tattered state flag, is retained in the glass case at the Massachusetts State House on Beacon Hill. One of his brothers, Chandler, enlisted in the 9th Vermont Volunteers. 2 of his brothers, Kimball and Riley, enlisted in the 2nd U.S. Sharpshooters, Company H, the same as my grandfather. Riley was killed in action in Washington, D.C. in 1862. We talked a little bit about the sharpshooter rifle, which was very, very interesting. The rifle in the back that you see there, if you get a chance to take a look at it, was my great-grandfather's. Is a target rifle. He was active in target shooting and turkey shoots. And what it is, it's a James and Ferris half-stock precision rifle with a false muzzle and a scope. If you look at it, it's this long. Now, I don't know if he used that to do the sharpshooting required to become a sharpshooter, but there's a good chance he learned how to shoot with it. He was heavily involved with turkey shoots. It's an 1850s rifle, and there's one just like it in the NRA Museum, and they say there's 11 of them were produced between 1840 and 1860. As he mentioned, many men took their own rifles into conflict, but I don't believe this one was. It's in too good a shape to have been used in battle. But there's a picture back there on the left of my great-grandfather when he was in the Civil War with his revolving rifle, which was a Colt revolving rifle, which was one of the first rifles that the sharpshooters was given, but they almost created a mutiny because of using that rifle, because it was a revolving rifle in black powder, and it was subject to chain fire. And if anybody knows what chain fire is, it means that when you shoot, the other cartridge would also explode. So you get one going down the barrel, and the rest would be going in all different directions. So when they were given the Sharps rifle after that point. He's buried in Worcester, Massachusetts at Hope Cemetery, and it was, a good point. That's really what got me interested in it. When my father gave me this rifle, and he was given to him by his father, who got it from Harrison Rawson, back in the early 1880s. And my grandfather was very active of keeping track of exactly everything about the gun, where it came from, how he got it, and passed down to me. This would be in the 4th generation. There were many Rawsons fought in the Civil War, and the book lists a lot of them from Massachusetts, New York, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. So it's a very active area. Some of the battles that they were involved, unfortunately my great-grandfather, Harrison Rawson, was only in for less than a year. And at the time he was released, in late 1862, is about the time that you mentioned about the train wreck. Because he was sent home injured, and I don't think it was in battle. I believe it was right about the time, based on the timelines I've got, at the time of that train wreck. So the U.S. Sharpshooters were there on that train, and there's a chance that maybe he was injured, one of the 40 so injured on that train. But if you look at some of the battles, let me know if any of these names ring a bell for the 2nd U.S. Sharpshooters, Company H. Peninsula Campaign, 2nd Battle of Bull Run, Battle of Antietam, Battle of Fredericksburg, Battle of Chancellorsville, Battle of Gettysburg, Battle of Wilderness, Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse, Battle of Cold Harbor, and the Siege of Petersburg. Any of those sound familiar?
Oh, yeah.
They were very active groups. So we should be very proud of the sharpshooters and the Vermont veterans from the Civil War, because they were involved with many battles, and only one of my relatives of the 13 cousins was killed in battle. So I think that's pretty fortunate, because they didn't drive anywhere. They marched, and they were traveling by train or by some kind of coach. So can you imagine carrying a rifle and having your food and have to worry about your daily routines during such a time? I mean, if you look at some of we were reading earlier about the soldiers, and what it said was, your most important deed or task of the day is to feed and water your horse. Your second most important task was to clean and oil and load your gun. The third most important task was to eat. The fourth was to clean up, and the fifth was to get wood for the next fire. And what they said is, if you don't worry about 3, 4, or 5, you worry about 1 and 2, because without them, you'd never make it to 3, 4, and 5. So, very interesting times, and
It seems to me that there's an excellent chance that he would have taken that to the trial.
oh yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
And I wouldn't rule out the possibility that he took it with him and he enlisted, because he wouldn't have had it very long, because the Sharps came along,
Yeah.
and he would have sent it home.
Well, looking at the condition of it, it's pretty pristine.
So they took awfully good
Yeah.
care of those.
And I carried it in here, and I think it weighs about 40 pounds. I don't know if I'd want to haul that around on my back.
Yeah.
So, but it's pretty heavy, and I'm sure he when he mustered in 1261, it was during the one of the times where, well, this is it. This is the call to arms. You've probably seen this by Colonel Burden, and this was dated 11/30/1861. And successful applicants will move out to Washington to do duty in the defense of city, in defense of the city on 12/31/61, and that's the day my great-grandfather mustered in, so I'm sure. So, thank you very much. This was a great.
As I say, if you have questions, but we've been here a long time, but if you have questions, I'll answer them individually. If you want to throw one at me here, that's fine. Yes, sir.
I'm curious as to what came first, the term sharpshooters or the sharps rifle?
I've been asked that question, and I don't know.
I
As I say,
assume-
I'm new at this, you know.
Yeah, I know you are.
Yeah, I don't know if they were called sharpshooters before they got the Sharps rifles.
My guess is it was.
You think they weren't?
Just guess.
I don't
think
know.
they were marks,
Marksmen, okay, fine.
but I don't know.
Yeah.
It just,
I really don't
they
know.
became sharpshooters once they got the sharps rifle.
Yeah,
You don't have the answer to that?
I don't have the answer. As I said, I'm new at this.
Yeah.
I'm new at this, but there's a lot of gold to be found in this, I think. And whether I'll ever get a chance to write this book, I don't know.
Of course you
Or you better, if I don't, you do it.
Yeah.
All right, good. Anyway, anything else? Oh, yeah, okay.
Two questions.
Yeah.
The inventor, Berdan.
Yeah.
The Berdan primer, is that the same inventor? or-
I'm sure it is, yeah, yeah.
And secondly, the rifles, I mean, if they're hitting out at 600 yards, that cannot possibly be a smooth. It's got to be a rifle.
It's a
You
right.
would think so.
Rifle there. I mean,
You would have to
or you
think
could
so.
have BDU. Hardly.
At Spotsylvania, the Vermont sharpshooters, extending their sights with a stick, brought a Confederate sharpshooter down from a tree at 1,400 yards.
Have you ever shot at
No, sir. No.
General Station? The Union General.
Yes.
That was Spotsylvania.
Yes.
Would walk out of his tent every morning while sharpshooters, northern sharpshooters were constantly firing, just the lucky shot against something. Eventually, somebody kept shooting at the side of the hours on the lights. One day, I came out smiling.
That's the death of General Sedgwick at Spotsylvania Courthouse, the 8th of May, just before they hit him in the cheek. He said they couldn't hit an elephant at that range. Famous last words. He was from Connecticut, yeah.
I know that in the early days of the war, there was a block on black enlistment.
Yeah.
After black people were allowed to enter the Union Army, both in the North and South, were there sharpshooter brigades, units developed on the same basis that the ones you described were established?
Is the question were there black sharpshooter units?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, not that I know. You know, they never got a fair deal, as you know, because they had white officers. Blacks could be privates, corporals, sergeants. They couldn't be officers, which was ridiculous. I never have heard of a black sharpshooter regiment. I have seen in Vermont letters remarks by Vermont soldiers on the shooting ability of black soldiers. They were good, apparently, with rifles, rifle muskets, I should properly say. But no, I've never heard of that. But I've never thought of it. You know, that's the first time I've heard that suggestion of that possibility. But I don't think so. You know, by the end of the war, there were more black soldiers in the Union Armies than there were in all of the Confederate armies. It's entirely possible that the war would have been lost without the black soldier. You know, one of the truths about the Civil War that doesn't get much attention, all the South ever had to do was get a draw. They just had to fight until the North said, that's enough. Go ahead, have your independence. But the North had to have a total victory. They had to totally beat the Confederates to bring them back into the Union. So the North had a much harder job. And they were fighting on Southern territory, which is much harder too. So they had more men and more guns and everything, but they had a tougher job. And the coming of black soldiers into the Union Armies may well have been the difference in the war. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Were the sharpshooters on the third day?
Where were the sharpshooters on the
Where were
third
they
day?
fighting on the third day?
The sharpshooters were not really involved on the third day. They were at the southern end of the battlefield and looking, there was always concern that Lee might try to go around the southern end of the line, as he should have done the second day. And so they were posted down at the southern end of the line, down in the area where they fought. They on the fourth day at Gettysburg, everybody thinks the battle was over, but it really wasn't. There was exchange of fire along the lines all through the fourth day. Rained like hell that day. But the sharpshooters were engaged on the fourth day. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. Please fill out the forms on the chairs if you can. Have some refreshments. Have your books signed. Buy some books.
Sorry, sir. Sorry.